Meantime, Elon Musk adding another $26 billion to his wealth yesterday. Surge in Tesla stock. He's now worth $256 billion. That's according to Forbes. But this morning's Wall Street Journal is putting a new spotlight on Mr. Musk, reporting that he had, quote, secret conversations with Vladimir Putin. Among other items, the paper reports that Putin asked Musk to avoid activating his Starlink satellite internet service over Taiwan as a favor to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Eamon Javers joins us from Washington. It is a story that is already making noise at this very early hour.
Yeah, it absolutely is, Andrew. This is an important and astonishing story here from the Wall Street Journal, an enormous scoop by them. I should say at the outset that CNBC has not been able to independently confirm all the information in this story, but to give you a sense, here's what the Wall Street Journal is reporting this morning. As you suggest, they're saying that Musk has been in regular contact with Vladimir Putin since late 2022. They're also saying that the discussions included personal topics, business, and geopolitical tensions, and saying that Putin asked Musk, as you say, not to activate Starlink over Taiwan as a favor to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Now, we should say that the Wall Street Journal story here is sourced to a number of officials, American, European, and Russian officials, confirming the existence of these conversations, which have not been previously reported before. I've spent the evening last night after this story broke talking with several former high-ranking U.S. intelligence officials, and here's what I can tell you their reaction was overnight. They're saying that it's unclear, first of all, if Musk has disclosed his contacts with Vladimir Putin as were required under his top-secret U.S. security clearance. They're also saying that failure to report contacts with foreign nationals can be grounds for suspension and in extreme cases, especially if it's deliberate failure to disclose foreign intelligence contact, the person could be charged with criminal charges. The U.S. may be trying to intercept Putin's communications, and Musk could have been recorded here, depending on the technology used. The NSA would normally refer to Musk as just U.S. person number one in any intelligence reports about those conversations. But if his identity is relevant here, U.S. intelligence reports may expressly reference Elon Musk's name in any reporting around any conversations between the two men that would have been intercepted by U.S. intelligence. We don't know any of that at this hour. There's still a lot that we don't know, including the exact content of these conversations. We don't know what Musk's intent was in having these conversations. Musk has been active on his social media platform this morning. I have not seen any comment from Elon Musk. We'll be eager to hear from him as soon as we can as to what his intent was in having these conversations with Vladimir Putin. But certainly, guys, this morning, some enormous questions being raised about why Elon Musk has been in regular contact, as the Wall Street Journal reports, with Vladimir Putin.
So a couple of things, Eamon. I don't know if you remember, but if you go back to 2022, there was a moment where Ian Bremmer, who runs a firm called Eurasia, who's been a guest on our program many a times, made a comment about Elon Musk suggesting that he was talking to Putin at the time. Elon Musk then came out and denied it. You also have this interesting piece in the Journal story where the Kremlin spokesperson is confirming that there was dialogue between them, but suggesting that the dialogue only took place once. I'm not saying once is good or bad. I'm just saying that he's saying it's once. And the story itself is suggesting something very, very different, unless you think that we're misreading it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, fascinating that the Kremlin would even confirm the single conversation, but they are in this piece quoted on the record saying there was one conversation, but no more than that. That's the Russian story here. The Wall Street Journal reporting that there have been regular contacts between the two men since 2022. And the question is, again, Andrew, what was Elon Musk's intent? Why does he need to reach out to Vladimir Putin? Clearly, Vladimir Putin has every reason to talk to Elon Musk, given the war in Ukraine, the value of SpaceX to the Pentagon, the value of Starlink on the battlefield in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin this is an oft-repeated cliche about him, but Vladimir Putin is a former KGB official. There's just no question that Vladimir Putin would have been trying to utilize Elon Musk as an asset for the Russian state.
Right.
The question is, what was Elon Musk thinking he was doing in those conversations, and what did he actually do in those conversations?
The piece
Nothing
seems
in
to
this story beyond that general description of the content of the conversations, though. And the question I have in my mind as reading that piece is whether the United States actually intercepted those conversations, and whether there are people in U.S. intelligence who know what Elon Musk was saying to Vladimir Putin.
Well, I think that is the big question. But the other thing that I was going to ask you is there's this idea in the article that because he has so much, quote-unquote, power insofar as he obviously controls Starlink, SpaceX, and all sorts of other things, that somehow the government, if the government knew this, that they were somehow treading lightly on this. Do you believe that?
Yeah. I do. Yeah. I mean, that squares with my understanding of reality here. I mean, the U.S. government is in some ways in a box here, Andrew, right? Because they can't get to space without SpaceX, right? The Pentagon has a billion-plus classified contract with SpaceX. We have U.S. government contracts in terms of Starlink communications around the world. All of that is important to the Pentagon. And you saw Boeing's failure to get the astronauts off the space station, right? It's not like we have reliable other alternatives in this country, or at least as many as we used to. So that is a problem for the U.S. government. This is a big, powerful industrialist in the United States on the scale of which we just haven't seen in the U.S. maybe ever, but certainly in generations. And this is a person that the U.S. government has to deal gently with. According to my conversations with U.S. intelligence officials last night, it is possible for them, if Elon Musk did not report these conversations, we don't know that, but if he did not report these conversations as required under his top secret clearance, it is possible he could be heading for a revocation of his top secret clearance. But if you're the U.S. government, again, you're in a box there, because with Elon Musk, his prickly personality, his giant ego, do you drive him farther into the arms of Vladimir Putin by pulling his top secret clearance than would achieve any good, right? I mean, you saw what happened when Joe Biden hosted GM at an EV event at the White House without inviting Tesla. You know, that sort of overt snubbed Elon Musk and Tesla because they're a non-union shop. That rankled Elon Musk, and there's some analysis which says that that event was really what drove Elon Musk toward the Trump campaign and his hugely important role in the Trump campaign now. So if you are the U.S. government weighing all these things, do you go after an attempt, if it's possible, to pull his clearance? That's an open question.
Eamon, one of the biggest questions the piece raised for me was this idea of whether or not he kept Starlink from Taiwan at Vladimir Putin's request. Vladimir Putin, according to this article, suggested that it would be a huge favor to China if he didn't do that. You look it up, and there is no Starlink there right now, but it's because Elon Musk wanted a joint venture, apparently. Taiwan won't allow joint ventures, so they've said no. Taiwan is now in the process of building their own satellite network because they also felt a little uncomfortable with Elon Musk, just based on some of his past comments about China. How you sort that situation out, and he's already said that, you know, if Trump loses, they might try and put him in jail.
And Trump has been, when he was asked how many times has he talked to Putin after the reports came out, he's been in contact with Putin off and on for the last couple of years. And I think he deflected that question at the time as well. I don't know if he has any more.
He doesn't have top secret clearance anymore, though, right? Is it
Right, but you could, if it was only Starlink, whenever it was discussed, you could almost make a case that that's something that, I don't know. Obviously, it's sticky. Should Trump be talking to Putin? Should anyone be talking to Putin, or should everyone be trying to talk to Putin to try and end this thing and have no more bloodshed? I don't know what the right thing is. Or are we trying to degrade the Russian army and? Right.
I mean, the law is the rule is if you have a top secret clearance, you shouldn't be talking to foreign nationals, certainly not the leader of a hostile power, without disclosing those conversations to U.S.
But we don't know if he disclosed it.
The question here is, did Musk do that? Look, it may be that he did do that. you know, and it may be that there are people in the U.S. government who are aware of these conversations and have been aware of these conversations.
Seems like they know
And
everything.
the other question here around this story, Joe, is you know, who leaked this and why? And it clearly is a shot across the bow of Elon Musk. Somebody's trying to get him to knock it off.